Hey everybody, Dirili here, and today we have the tutorial for the slow shrinking method for shrinking vinyl doll heads. Before trying this, please make sure to watch my intro to shrinking video or read my webpage about it linked in the description below to ensure that you understand some doll features that are not compatible with the process and some of the risks involved. Before we start, safety first. Acetone is toxic, so you don't want to go purposely inhaling it or anything. It evaporates super fast though, so even if you're working in a small bathroom, all you have to do is just leave the door open, and that's plenty of ventilation. Make sure to keep the acetone containers covered at all times, not just for your health, but also because you'll waste a lot of it if you don't. Like I said, it evaporates super fast, and if you leave the lid open for like 20 minutes, you're going to find your acetone is significantly lower than you left it. And lastly, in the safety category, make sure you keep your doll's bodies or anything else plastic out of your work area, because acetone melts most types of plastics. I'll do a fun demonstration about that later on. Now, getting down to the matter, let's talk about what you'll need. Number one, obviously a vinyl doll head. I have not run into a single doll that won't shrink. It doesn't matter how hard it is, Moxie Teen, Bratzilla, and the 17-inch Monster High and Ever After High dolls all have pretty hard vinyl, and they all shrank just fine for me. Number two, you need 100% acetone. Make sure that it's 100% pure and not some kind of conditioning nail polish remover or anything. Head shrinking can be a rather sensitive chemical process, and any and all pollutants can alter your results, or at least the speed of the process, so you want to reduce any extraneous factors that you're able to. For best results, it's best to use a fresh solution for each soak, but you can reuse the same solution once on the third soak, since many of the pollutants that came from the first soak will be gone. I use Onyx Professional, though you can use anything you want, like I said, as long as it's 100% acetone. And you'll need at least 2 16-ounce bottles of it. Possibly a third. Actually, with slow shrinking, you might not need a third, but it's probably good to have a third one around just in case. Number 3, you'll need a glass jar. With this method, the head won't blow up nearly as much as the fast shrink method does, so a 4x2-inch 8-ounce jar is just fine for our purposes here. Number 4, water, pure and simple, to dilute the acetone and make the process more gentle on your doll. Just plain old tap water's fine. Number 5, optional Q-tips. If you plan on removing the face paint, you should do that beforehand. Not just because it's an extra factor that you can easily eliminate as a pollutant from your shrinking process, but also because it's more difficult to remove the paint after you've shrunken the head and everything's dry. You can still do it, it's just more stubborn at that point. If you need tips about that, I have a video up already about dehairing and paint removal. With that out of the way, let's get down to business. Step 1. Prepare your doll for the process. Like I said, if you're going to repaint, remove the paint. If you're going to reroot, remove the hair. If you remove the hair, use some dishwashing liquid to wash the head and rinse it well. If it's still sticky from having had too much glue in the hair, then use some Goo Gone to wipe that off and then wash it again. If you left the hair on, shampoo the hair and rinse it really well. The shampoo cleans the head well enough too, so you don't have to wash it further than that. Sometimes you'll run into dolls that actually have sticky hair from the glue in the head having seeped out into the hair. You can use Goo Gone to fix that as well, but you may need to shampoo it more than once to actually get all of the Goo Gone out of the hair after that, because it's a pretty oily substance. Now that you have a nice clean doll head, step 2. Fill your jar with about 10% water. It doesn't have to be exact, you can just eyeball it. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. Then fill the rest of the jar with acetone and use something to stir it. Remember, acetone melts plastic, so you'll want to use something wood or metal or glass, something that won't melt. Then you submerge the head in the solution, making sure the inside gets filled up as well. Now you just let it soak for 48 hours, so 2 days. You let it sit there. As far as I've learned, there is no temperature limitation. I haven't had any problems or differences in heat or cold or humidity or anything like that. So 2 days later, you come back for step 3. Take the head out, gently squeezing the acetone out of the head back into the jar as much as you can. Slow shrinking doesn't enlarge the head all that much, so it's not terribly delicate, and you can rinse the hair out immediately and wring it out right then and there. But be careful when you're taking the head out not to touch the face paint, because the face paint, having been soaked in the acetone, will be soft, so you can accidentally rub off the face if you touch it while you're taking it out. Now you set it aside for another 48 hours to dry. So coming back again 2 days later, step 4, decide if you want to do subsequent soaks. After that 48 hours, after having removed the head, most of the acetone will have evaporated from the head, though it still won't be done shrinking or hardening yet. Finishing time greatly depends on the particular doll itself. It can be done in a week, or it may take as many as 4. It depends on the exact chemical composition of the batch of vinyl used to create the head. Even 2 heads that look exactly alike can have chemical differences, and unless you're a chemist and can take samples and break down and analyze them, there's no predicting exactly how long it's going to take. Depending on how much you want to shrink the head, now you have to guesstimate and decide if you want to do more soaks, and if you want to reuse the old solution or dump that and use fresh solution. 3 soaks usually seems to get the head as small as it'll go. Some heads shrink a lot even after just 1 soak and just 2 days of drying though. So sometimes you can tell right away you don't want to shrink it anymore. But most of the time, you just have to use your discretion and guesstimate. Like I mentioned earlier, you can reuse the acetone, but I highly suggest using a fresh solution for at least the second soak, because most of the pollutants will have come out after the first one. When you took the head out from the first soak and squeezed the acetone out, you probably saw particles left over from the glue and bits of hair inside come out. Most likely there's a layer of sediment in the bottom of the jar now from all that stuff, and the solution may be a little discolored if the hair or the vinyl had certain kinds of dye in it. So it's best to dump that first solution out. Rinse the jar, dry it with a paper towel, and pour in your fresh mixture, 10% water, and then fill the rest with acetone for your next soak. Any further soaks you can use your best judgment on, eyeballing the solution to see if it has a lot of particles in it again, or if it looks clean enough to you, and judge how your head looks like it's been shrinking thus far. So step 5, final drying. Personally, I like to do everything I can before the head is fully dry and hardened, because it's much more difficult to take it off and put it back on when it's done. You can use a hairdryer to heat it up and soften it, and that helps to a certain degree, but it's just simply easier to get the head back on the body before it's totally solid again. You'll have some time to reroot while it's still softer, although even if it's fully hardened, you can still reroot. There's a little trick to that though, and I'm going to be making a video about that later on. You can also reshape the head as it's shrinking. I call it pressurized reshaping. I'll put up a few pictures of here of setups that I've used to do this. I've done this in the past to change the shape of a few heads as they were shrinking, because especially with Ever After High dolls, because their heads tended to be very, very round, and I wanted them to be more oval, so I would compress them into a more oval shape as they were shrinking. And you have to keep checking it and adjusting it as it's shrinking so that it doesn't shift in some weird way and then your head ends up drying in some strange shape and position. And once the head's fully dry and hard, or pretty much dry and hard, you can even do additional reshaping by using a dremel or sandpaper or files, which is something else I'm going to do in a future tutorial. I like to do pretty drastic modifications, so yeah, I take a dremel and take huge portions of vinyl off to completely reshape the faces sometimes, and use the sandpapers and all to grade it down back to smoothness again. Also, you'll want to take an X-Acto blade and widen the inside neck hole a bit, so that even after the head is fully dried, that will make it a bit easier to take it off and put it back on again. Careful not to trim too much or it won't hold well at the top of the neck and it'll just fall down on your doll and your doll will permanently be shrugging. You also need to trim the anchor on the body or it'll be nearly impossible to get the head off ever again. You'll see here I'm recording a bit of me cutting the wings off the anchor, and then I use a flesh cutter to trim around that circular base of the anchor. Flesh cutter cuts through that like butter. It's really easy to use. And I've never even cut myself doing this. It's so easy to use. And I usually push the head down a little bit farther on the neck instead of leaving it at the top. Since with the shrunken head, if you leave it at the top, the neck looks kind of long. And I think it looks a little bit more normal if you just push it down a teensy little bit. So yeah, this doll isn't completely done drying yet, but she will be soon. I'm going to be doing tutorials on her of reshaping and on rerooting, but I'm going to need a couple days for that because I have some other stuff to take care of. So let me know in the comments which tutorial you'd rather see first. Would you rather see rerooting in shrunken hardened vinyl, or would you rather see reshaping? I asked the same thing in the quick shrinking video. I don't know if I'll even get anybody answering. Maybe I'll just have to decide it myself. We'll see. But actually those tutorials and a lot of other tutorials I already have up on my website. So if you don't want to wait for anything, you can visit my website at www.dirili.com. That's Dirili. And that's been there for a really long time, and it will be for some time to come. But they're kind of old tutorials because I wrote them a long ago, and I've learned a lot of things since then, so they kind of need to be updated at some point. These spoken video tutorials here probably have more information, especially on shrinking, than the written ones do. Well, that concludes my slow shrinking tutorial. Hope to see you for whichever tutorial comes up next, whichever one gets chosen. And I'd be so grateful for any likes, subscriptions, or such. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye-bye, everybody, and happy head shrinking!